All right, welcome back. This is the Something About Your podcast. I am Kent Lindstrom. I'm your host. My guest today, Alison McCauley. How are you doing?
Great. Good morning.
Thanks so much for doing this.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So, Alison is a international best-selling author of the book Unblocked, How Blockchains Will Change Your Business and What to Do About It. Oh, wait, hang on. Let me read that differently. How Blockchains Will Change Your Business and What to Do About It. Is that better? She's the founder and CEO of Unblocked Future, a consulting firm. Studied sociology and a bunch of other things at Stanford. You went to Stanford twice, is that right?
Yes, hard to leave that place.
And has been executive of both Exojet and PeopleSoft. And I just got, right before the podcast, like Unblocked, like the pun in your book title.
Oh. Well, it's got many layers to it, right? So
It's like, did you ever see the TV show Friends?
yes.
Okay, so the place they go is called Central Perk. That's the coffee shop. It's called Central Perk. It's a pun on Central Park.
Yeah.
And so somewhere in season like 7, Phoebe, one of the characters, is walking in and apropos of nothing looks at it and goes, "Oh, I just got that." So I'm like Phoebe
That's
with your book.
perfect,
Like, "Oh yeah, I just got that."
Well, it actually has multiple layers because if you think about it, is a name that came to me early on, and I kept trying to think of something better,
Right.
and never could. But there's so many different ways that we could unblock knowledge about this complicated space, that we can unblock our future. So it's like art where there's many interpretations.
Did your publisher hassle you? Did they have a really bad alternate title?
No, I didn't go through that experience, which most authors go through.
No. I just had Adriana Gascoigne was just on. She's the founder of Girls in Tech, and her book is called Lady Boss. And for some reason, she got hassled for that.
Oh, really?
She gets hassled for girls in tech because girls, not women. And she's like, well, but it's like girls, like girlfriends. Like I go to Hawaii with my girlfriends, and I don't know why she got hassled for.
Because everyone always has an opinion.
Yeah, no good. Yeah, like I'm pretty sure the woman running Girls in Tech isn't like out to get women. So how did you come to go to Stanford? How did you come to go to Stanford in the first place?
I didn't want to go to Stanford, actually, because I lived in the area growing up. And so I wanted to be free and go somewhere else.
Right.
But Stanford has the top, I don't know if it still does, but it had the top psychology program in the country.
Right.
And that was my interest. I studied with Philip Zimbardo, who did the prison experiment.
Oh, that guy.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, I first met him when I was 3, actually. So he was doing some studies, and my mom had me go in for a study. And evidently, I was scared of him. And he is intimidating.
He's the prison experiment guy. He seems like he would be a scary
bit of
guy.
an intimidating look. But I ended up TAing for him, and I was so enraptured by that. So that's what got me there, even though it was in my backyard.
How did you figure that out? Like, that doesn't seem like a thing that a teenager, well, not this teenager, would have ever thought to do. Like, I thought the world was kind of, there's like, lawyers and doctors and musicians and actors was like the whole world. Like, how did you figure out, how'd you move toward that?
I was always fascinated by what makes us tick and what makes us change our behavior. I was almost obsessed by it. And I grew up in a family of engineers. My brother and my dad designed satellite dishes.
Okay.
And holds multiple patents. My brother would always be tinkering and ended up going to Caltech. And I also am drawn to engineering, but I wanted to rebel. And since I was a super nerd,
wow,
my form of teenage rebellion was to say, I'm going to not take that route, and I'm going to go deep into social science.
Yeah, that's quite a rebellion.
I know, I'm so reckless.
I had like the super new age parents. So there was like no rebellion. Like anything you did would be like, cool, I'm going to be an actor and do drugs.
Oh, that's so frustrating. How do you find your space?
They'd be like, be the best drug doing actor you could be. Like, oh, come on, man. So I went to school and studied economics.
That's a great way to sort of rebel. Yeah.
It was just kind of boring for them. They're like, okay, I guess like it'd be cool if you did something else.
That's the best you can do is rebel by being boring.
Yeah,
with new age parents.
Pretty much. Did you? So were computers in the mix then at that point, or the internet, like in the mix?
Yeah, not yet.
Yeah.
So I graduated I left graduate school right at the just before the dot-com boom.
Yeah.
And so, but I remember my first computer was a Timex Sinclair ZX81, and I loved that thing. So my brother and I would sit in front of the television, because that was the screen,
right?
And we program this thing,
and there were wires involved connecting it to the TV,
and
right?
its memory was a cassette.
Yeah, right.
And it had no real keyboard. I mean, it was just flat. And I have it still. It's about, it's a couple inches by a couple inches. And that
is so cool. Everyone I have on has some early computer, like a Commodore or an Apple, depending on like when they.
No, this thing wouldn't click. This was, and it was fascinating to me that this could happen, that you could code something.
Yeah.
And have it make things happen. And so it was clear to me that early on, I was kind of fascinated by that relationship. Like, what does this do to us? Why is this exciting? Why is this
do you
interesting?
remember? Because we'll see if I definitely tie it to like what we think of blockchain now. But do you remember that period of like? I just remember kind of becoming aware of the internet when there was this kind of crazy group of people who were into it, and you're like, I don't really get it, and then you would kind of try to use it, and it was kind of amazing, but you had no idea what was coming. Like, you had no idea there's gonna be a Facebook and an Uber and all that, but you'd be like, I just tapped a message out to a guy in London about my kite hobby or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Like, you kind of had a sense it was amazing, but
we couldn't wrap our heads around it. So, and we're kind of at that stage with so many technologies now. We just, from 1994, we couldn't see Amazon or Facebook or where this would go. We didn't have the mindset for it. And that's where we are now with so much of this. And we can project what kind of business models will fall and break from this. And we can have some theories, but we're not at a point where we can really understand how this will all be applied.
But it's interesting that everyone like, if you had put together your ideas, as people do today, about blockchain back then, they'd probably be kind of like, you never would have gotten to Uber. Like, you would never have guessed that one, that the internet's going to turn to phones and then you can get rides and things like that. But you knew it was something at the time.
Yeah, and that's kind of where it feels now in the blockchain space, is that we don't know what's going to come out of this, and it could very much be a mashup of different technologies. So maybe the big thing is about blockchain plus IoT, or blockchain plus AR, or blockchain plus VR. Who knows? So
how do you get to, from Stanford, how do you get to like the internet, much less blockchain? Like, how do you get to being in the tech world at all from the psychology world? Whatever the psychology world is.
Well, my intent as I entered college was that I was going to become a psychologist.
Okay.
And then I got pulled into business and enjoyed it. And I thought that would be an area that would be so fertile and interesting. And so I went on and I studied organizational design and development. And so I got the organization piece of it. And it because of what was happening with the internet, when I finished graduate school, it became very clear that the relationship that we'd have between technology, what technology could become, and our humanity was going to be really fertile and interesting ground. So I got pulled back in.
Right.
It almost was, in a way, like coming home. It wasn't a very good rebellion, because here I was in tech again.
Right.
And it's proven to be, it's only gotten more and more interesting over time. And where our human behavior, where these emerging technologies meet with our human behavior, that's, to me, one of the harder parts. Right. So it seems like given enough time, we figure out the technology. Magic happens. Computers, we used to think computers had to fill a room, right?
Yeah.
And now we have these powerful supercomputers in our pockets.
Right.
So enough time, magic happens. But what tends to be a limiting factor is our ability to assimilate the technology.
Right.
And that's the kind of thing that's really interesting. So that's why I'm focused a lot of my time on adoption. So how do we get people to understand this technology and want it, to change their behavior, to use it?
Right. And how do you think it happened with the internet moving along? It feels like nobody ever really... Like, nobody told you what the internet was going to do. It just kind of did it, and then you experienced it, and you're like, this is great. Like, nobody said, here's how, you're going to email somebody and it's going to do this and that and that. It's just one day you got an email account and you sent an email and you're like, this is amazing. Or you signed up for Facebook and you're like, this is amazing. But you could have never described any of the things that were happening beforehand.
Yeah.
It seems like. And that just and so today, what I wonder when we think about blockchain, well, let's get to that. How did you come to start your own consultancy?
Yeah.
And you focus on technology companies.
Yeah. So the reason I consult is because I have a commitment problem with technology and that I want to always be in this continual river of new technologies and learn about new things. And so consulting was a great way to continually be exposed to that. And so there was this interesting moment. I mean, writing a book is a pretty large commitment.
Yeah.
And so that was difficult to make. But that is why I tend to do consulting, is that and I find that especially as technology evolves, it's the connections between them where a lot of interesting stuff happens. And so being able to have be a somewhat of a generalist across multiple technologies it can be an attribute for the kind of work I do.
So when you're consulting with somebody, what are they struggling with, or what are you helping them with that they need help with?
So what I focus on is helping companies that are working in emerging tech and new technology to be understood and to be heard by their markets. And that seems like a pretty simple thing, but there's a lot behind it. So we become so infatuated with our technology that we tend to forget, especially for founding teams, we forget that people who are encountering it for the first time don't necessarily understand it. I mean, we have a visceral understanding of how amazing it is and why people should use it, change their behavior to use it. But the outside world doesn't. Yeah. And so a lot of times that's a translation exercise. So translating PhDs to a business executive, for example. But more often than not, especially now, it's becoming a role of actively helping a market navigate why is this important? Why should I pay attention to this over the gazillion other things that are hitting me right now?
Yeah.
And help that market understand how do I actually move from this new thing you're doing to business opportunity that will have an impact for me.
Right.
I focus on B2B. So
this is like as a venture capitalist, people bring pitches to us all the time, like what they do. And James Curry of NFX just wrote a kind of a blog post about this, like how to get a meeting with a venture capital. 12, it's on the internet, so it's like 12 ways to get whatever. And it is amazing how many people will come in. They've built a company, they spend an hour with you, whatever, and at the end of it, you're like, "What do you guys do? Like, what is your company?" And you would think that would be almost like, how could that be? But it absolutely happens all the time.
It happens all the time. And what's shocking is that I work with scores of founders who underestimate how difficult it is to actually get to that point where you're resonating with a business problem. So we're so infatuated with our technology, and we don't understand technology does not make a market. Right. People make a market. And it takes, depending on your business, hundreds or thousands or millions, if you're B2B or B2C, of individual decisions, people changing the way they do something today.
Yep.
In a world that's so busy and so chaotic. There's a professor at Harvard who studies the economics of attention. That's his focus. And he's found that the cost of our attention has increased 7 to 9-fold over just a few decades.
Oh, wow.
That's greater than the increase in the cost of healthcare, right? I mean, it's astronomical. We have finite capacity.
Yeah.
Your target market has finite capacity to understand of attention, of time, and it's a battle to get to them. It's absolutely a battle to get to them, and it's getting harder.
I can't imagine, because when I was a kid, like, it was free. Like when I was a teenager, like I'm gonna read Lord of the Rings for the next 6 hours. That's all I'm doing.
Wasn't that amazing? Yeah. I miss those days.
All you've got to do is like anything, because I've already read Lord of the Rings 3 times, and so if you just got anything going on, so how has how do you think that's affected people? Like that the implication would be that they've got 6 times as much, well, either everything became 6 times as interesting or 9 times more interesting, or there's 9 times more stuff competing for your attention. Like,
Yeah.
how is this affecting humans, do you think?
Yeah,
Or is
I
it
guess
just
the
like,
latter. I mean, so we don't fully know yet, and that's a big and scary question.
Yeah.
We only have the capacity to absorb a very small sliver of what's actually going on. It's just not possible. And so I believe how this translates to people calling themselves experts. I think that's bull. I don't believe that. I believe experts are a fallacy today. I don't believe anybody can be an expert in anything. I was talking to somebody who's known as a thought leader in a certain function in technology in a certain functional area. And that functional area is known to be a little bit behind the times, so slower moving.
yeah.
And he told me, I don't know what's actually going on. I can't possibly know about what's happening now with the rate of innovation all around the world. And so much has broken free from a Silicon Valley hub that, especially with open source tools and a lot of investment that's happening outside of the US. It's just impossible to know.
Yeah.
So there's no such thing as an expert anymore.
Yeah.
I absolutely cringe when somebody tries to introduce me on stage as an expert.
That's a great example in your book of the dancing. Like, I think
yeah.
I forget the TED, whatever the TED guy is.
Chris Anderson.
Chris Anderson says like that he uses the example of kids learning a dance, and then the kids in Tokyo have the dance, but then the kids in Detroit see the dance immediately, as opposed to like however this used to work. Like you'd go to the barn, I don't know where people dance, but you would go see the dance like in a month or never in Japan, and within a week they've iterated like 90 times on some dance. And of course that happens with everything, dance. And
this happens with everything. And so we're building on innovations, and now we have this global marketplace of ideas. And so the crowd is accelerating innovation, and that's contributing to the fact that we can no longer navigate it. So we can try,
right,
but it's very difficult to know what's actually happening in a fast-moving market.
Yeah, I'm really intrigued. I haven't heard anybody put together sort of like what is the difference between growing up with, because it's only going to happen once that you grow up without internet, and then there's another generation that grows up with it. Like where you just have like, well, I just read books the whole time and burned, whatever kids do, like just whatever, made stuff up. Like I can't imagine a world where I was like super entertained the whole time. And like no one's like explained if that's good or bad or.
I think about this a lot. I'm the parent of 2 teenagers, and it's interesting. So I work in technology, and I'm a mom, and sometimes those can conflict in an unexpected way. Yeah. I work really hard to teach my kids to have a lot of intent about how they interact with technology, and so I hold them back and make them study the impact on them before they use it. So my daughter is a teenager. I won't let her have Instagram until she's studied the impact of social media on her. I know it's, and she's, it's high school is starting. And so I was like, you better get your studying in. We need to have a discussion. I know I'm that mom. And then my son has fallen a lot more into video gaming, and I ask him, we don't have screen time rules, but I ask him before he starts, what's your intent?
Yeah.
What do you want to get out of this? And ask him afterwards, how'd that go? Were you able to follow through with your intent?
Oh, wow.
And then afterwards, I'll be like, hey, so did they harvest you? Did they harvest you more than you intended?
Right.
So it's I have those kinds of conversations in my family.
Is this working?
I still am refining it. Yeah. So it's worked okay until now. It is a fight, and this is a battle that our kids will have with technology as it becomes more pervasive and more difficult too to tell what's real and what's not. There's going to be more of a capability to pull you in and lose control as a human. And so that's what I think we need to figure out how to teach our kids is how do you have more intent about how you interact with technology and how do you stay in control? And I think we need to do a lot more examination as a culture about how we do that. I think we need more tools. And so it's just because you mentioned reading. My son just told me last night, we had a philosophical discussion, and he just told me he'd read one of the Malcolm Gladwell's books 3 times.
Whoa.
And I was just floored that he had taken the time in his short teenage life to read that book 3 times. He said, I just found it fascinating. So
which one was it? Do you know?
I'll have to ask him. Yeah.
That is pretty incredible.
He was telling me some crazy stories. I said, wow, how do you know those stories so well?
That's some good
They're straight from Malcolm
You should write a
Gladwell.
parenting book. Like
I've been thinking about it, actually. Writing books are really hard, but I've been
I couldn't do it.
I've been starting to think about parenting, because it's an issue of our age, and it's going to have a massive impact.
Yeah.
We are, as parents, you don't have the tools to and the frameworks to help you navigate this for your kids.
Yeah. The other a version of that, of you having your kids study the technology they're about to use, is that most people, a lot of people who used computers like right before this generation actually knew how they worked. Like they literally built a computer. Like computer class was like, well, build a computer, like get a soldering iron and, put the parts together, and then how like memory works and like all the way up. And now you're just so abstracted. Like I'm worried that somebody's going to forget how to make the computers.
It's interesting because we are focused on software more than hardware, right?
And not even that, just like you don't even see your computer starting up and doing a system check and,
it's like cars, right? We no longer know how to fix cars.
Right. And you used to be able to, like, if you had a coat hanger and some chewing gum, you could fix like a Volkswagen, you could fix like so easily.
Yeah, and that's another thing that's lost in education today is this tactile understanding of mechanics and how things work. And I think that's a real loss. And I've heard of some projects that are looking to attack that, but I don't think they're supported. So we are in our schools today, we have so much focus on, which I think is fantastic, on coding and software. Right. And yet I think we're missing that hardware piece. And my son's interested in hardware, so I think about that a lot because he's odd man out right now.
Yeah. I don't know if you can fit, like my high school, pre-Prop 13 in California, when they got rid of it, we had like a wood shop.
Yes,
and
exactly.
We had an auto shop.
Yes.
Like think about that in high school, learning to fix a car.
Yeah. My kids went to a public school in middle school. And so in my kids' school, they had a bike shop where they'd get old bikes and you'd learn how to fix them. And the skills they learned in that were insane. And not only that, it's super useful. They're already using those all the time.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it also teaches you too, like you can actually fix stuff.
Exactly. It's very empowering.
Like we have stuff go wrong in our building, and there's like these kind of like millennials who live in there, and they're just like, I don't know, we should call somebody. Well, you could look at what's going on. Like think about what happened to the door. What's the part that you need? Where's Lowe's located? Like you could figure it out if you really wanted to.
But we lose the ability to do that. So it's the difference between being able to fix something and Google fix something, right? Where can you just Google to do it, or can you do it yourself? And so there are pieces of our specialties that we're losing, and that does concern me. Yeah,
I'm YouTube handy. YouTube's the great one.
YouTube handy, you're learning how to do it yourself. Yeah. Google. Well, I'm thinking of just hiring somebody. So my garage door broke this morning, and I had a specialist within 10 minutes lined up.
That is so cool.
Which is fantastic, but are we losing the ability to be able to fix that ourselves?
Sometimes the future is just so cool.
Yeah, I prefer not to fix my own garage door.
So how do you? Well, you can't really. Like it's a spring. So at some point you get interested in blockchain. Like this isn't still not the most common thing for people in tech to like have fallen in love with it. Like what happened? I mean, at some point you obviously get so in love with it, you write a book. So how did this happen?
So I've noticed that people who get into this space tend to be pulled in where you have this thing that you call that moment where everything changes. And I've talked to a lot. If you go up to anyone who's in the space and you ask them, what was your moment where you finally understood this? You'll get the most interesting stories. Yeah. And so it tends to capture you at many levels. So I had my moment when a client came to me with an idea for a pivot to the blockchain space, and I was super skeptical.
Yeah.
And I wasn't sure exactly whether this was just about going onto a bandwagon and writing that up or something real. So I sat down and grilled the lead engineer for an hour and came out absolutely dazed, because what I saw, what I understood, even in that superficial level of understanding, was something that attacked so many different pools of what I'll call digital discontent, areas where we've got large challenges that we don't have a good solution for. And so I could see the many layers, not just from a technical level, but from a societal level, a cultural level. And I was absolutely drawn in. And I had this moment where after I walked out on the street, and it felt a little disarming that everyone was walking around as if nothing had happened. Because for me, I have trouble making commitment to one area because I'm so interested in so many. Yeah. And this one, I knew at that moment that this is something I wanted to just dive into. So it was sort of that drop everything moment where I went home and I started asking myself questions about this because I understood so little at that point, and then going out and finding answers. And I started spending pretty much, 7 days a week, too many hours a day, absolutely focused on this space. And I didn't eat well. I didn't sleep well. I stopped meditating. I stopped parenting as actively as I should because I was so infatuated and there was so much to learn.
And what got said in that meeting? Like, what was was there a piece of it where you went, wait, you can do that? Like, what was
It was more like layers. I mean, when we look at it, in a very tactical level, it's actually extremely boring. It is it's a ledger. I mean,
well, that's what I wonder. Is it just like something? Is this just like a fancy name for like a database?
Yeah, basically. I mean, it is. But what's interesting about it is how it can shift power, relationships, and potential for what you can create. Because essentially, what it does is, and this is the entry-level definition that I'll use with people that don't have an understanding of the space, is it essentially allows you to certify something is true without checks and balances in the middle. And checks and balances create a lot of friction. Yeah. And the friction is in the form of time or errors or cost. Right. And so if we look at how this can change things, if we were to look at the internet, at a very high level, general way, the internet broke business models because it cut the cost of communication. Yep. Blockchains have the potential to break business models and change the way we do things because they cut the cost of verifying truth. So now you can do it in smaller and smaller increments. You can certify something and track something and certify that something's true without a bunch of middlemen and processes.
So what do you make of cryptocurrency being the first kind of big example of something that's been, that came into people's consciousness as like, this actually is something I can do. Like, I actually went out and bought Bitcoin. Yeah. And then somebody actually came and stole it because AT&T gave my phone number to
and
somebody.
And that is a badge of honor.
It's just
everyone in the space has had something happen.
It is pretty like there's just nothing you can do. It's the weirdest.
Like the UI UX is terrible.
And there's no bank
in the space. And that's it. Yeah, there's no one you can go to. So what is absolutely fascinating is that you've got, so let's take a look at the Bitcoin blockchain. So that was the first blockchain was created to make Bitcoin possible. Yeah. And so that was the very first blockchain. And now there's so many blockchains, all different kinds and types. But that one holds, $200 billion worth of value, give or take, depending on the day, that nobody owns. Nobody owns that. No one is in charge. Yep. Absolutely nobody's in charge. That's insane. So in terms of does it work, I think that's a really interesting proof of concept that something is working really well.
Yeah. And I see it, that I watch it go up. It's moving, at least this is my observation. It's moving against uncertainty. So when there's like when China's doing something crazy and then the U.S. is doing something more back and forth, then Bitcoin keeps going up. Because I think on those days, everyone's like, those guys are... You're seeing what people can do when they're in charge, and you're like, well, that's not really perfect. So people move to Bitcoin. That's why.
Yeah, and you'll see it if you look at distress in a certain company. You'll see the activity, country. You'll see the activity increase.
Yeah, like Venezuela.
So
somebody told me what the other coin was that they're using. There's some other thing. I forget.
Well, there's a lot. There's so many.
Although it does seem to be kind of reducing to Bitcoin. Like I bought like 10 different coins. It's really fun. You should do it. If you've never plan on losing all your money.
I think everyone should experiment with it.
Yeah. But it was so fun because I would go out. There's like hundreds of coins, and there's one that lets you buy land in this virtual world.
Yeah.
And it's ridiculous, but it's like one of the few coins you actually could buy virtual land in this virtual world.
Yeah, Decentraland. I think that's an interesting one to look at. And so each one, I think, from an intellectual exercise, so even if you put $20 into something, at least it gives you skin in the game, and somehow you become more engaged.
Yeah.
And then you can start to research the stories behind it. So the one you mentioned is really interesting, where you're buying this piece of land, and the idea is that land will become more valuable, and you can cultivate it, create things on that land. And so it's interesting to see how that creates a mini economy and enables this new kind of creativity. We talked about all sorts of new ways to exhibit your creativity and put something out there, and to be able to monetize that in new ways. And then you can extend that to so many different kinds of areas. So we started off here talking about cryptocurrency, but let's look at the sharing economy. So today we have ways through a platform that charges very high rents to rent out rooms through Airbnb and obtain rooms or ride shares. Right. What if we had a platform that wasn't as expensive in the middle, that allowed us to share pretty much everything in our garage? So for example, there are 80 million drills sitting in garages and sheds across the country right now. And do we really need all of them? How many hours of actual drill time does somebody use?
Yeah, I have 2 of them.
You have 2? Okay.
Yeah.
So you could create your own drill business with your 2 drills and rent them out to your entire neighborhood. Right. And so if you can do that, if you can do that safely in small increments, there's pretty much anything that we could lend out. And so that's an interesting thing. You could insure it just for that period of time. Again, using a blockchain to insure smaller and smaller increments.
So as you're reading, not eating well, what got you more and more excited? Is it that you could change? What was it that as you were? It was
all of the different. First of all, it is a new raw material that can be used in so many different ways. It has a potential to recreate foundational layers. So that in and of itself is interesting. It's the fact too that this could be applied to so many different areas and industries. And also there's so many different ways that people are looking to adapt this to do interesting things. I was talking with Sheila Warren, who is the first head of blockchain and DLT for the World Economic Forum. Yep. And she told me about her moment. And she said that when she understood what this was about, she would start waking up in the middle of the night with light bulbs popping off, thinking about how does this get applied to philanthropic efforts, or how does this get applied to trafficking, or so many different ways that you could apply it. And so that's kind of the juice that really gets going is once you understand some of the fundamentals, you have trouble seeing. It's very stimulating to think about all the different areas where this could be applied and what could happen. And we are at the very early stages. So this is all theoretical. The other thing is that we do not know how it will operate in the wild at scale. So there's a lot of unknowns. And from a social science perspective, I find that really interesting to try to project how this will change us. And
are we probably getting, and this is why I brought up earlier, thinking about the internet before it happened, are we getting it comically wrong? There's a pretty funny YouTube video. If you ever go back and watch Katie Couric when she first when they're first talking about the internet and they are talking about email, and she's like, da da da, and doesn't know what to make of the at sign. She's like, you say at or ampersand, or how do you say it? And you get ha ha ha, okay, you're stupid. But of course, at the time, you had no idea. You had no idea like how to say it or what it was. Like, so you kind of guessed a bunch of stuff that would happen, but then what happened was completely different.
Yeah, and we are already getting it wrong, and there's a piece of it in the general say business population, and a lot of that has to do with Bitcoin, because there's so many people that believe that they're the same thing, and have then discounted blockchain technology because Bitcoin is seen as something separate. So, or seen as this thing that has been sensational, and there's all sorts of strange headlines associated with it. And this is very dangerous because it cuts off understanding. And so if you're thinking of as an executive that has to deal with digital disruption, you have to do this. You have to have this new skill, which is essentially wave spotting. It's like surfers that sit out there and look for where's the real wave. You need to be able to do that. You need to be able to see as these waves start way out on the horizon, which one is real, which one is not, which one should I catch, which should I pay attention to. And that goes back to what we were saying earlier. It is very difficult. It's more and more difficult to do that. And so blockchain is particularly complicated because of its tumultuous history and its mysterious origin story and all of the headlines. And so it is extremely confusing to somebody. And that's one of the reasons I wrote the book, is that the more time I spent deep in the blockchain community, the more struck I was by the difference between the vision of the future of the people who understood the technology and those outside of it.
Well, and I think one of the things that you said something in the book that I thought was actually pretty elegant. You may not smell the smoke and aren't feeling the heat, but it's coming.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
Oh, thank you.
But I do think like there's kind of a crew of people who are like, it's just, it's not a thing. It's not a fad. It's like probably the first step I would think for an executive is, well, buy your book, but probably you should let that go. Like when I think Walmart just filed for a cryptocurrency patent.
August 1st, they filed a patent that alluded to, or it spoke to essentially digital currency, but who knows whether that has huge substance behind it? Who knows whether it was just a patent lawyer?
But there's a lot of smart companies like
this is happening,
not dismissing it.
This is happening.
And so as you write the book, you kind of, you don't need to go through them, but you kind of organize it into 6 ideas, right? Like 6 partitions of like what it was that in your research you said, hey, I kind of see a pattern here, and this is how it breaks down.
Well, one of the reasons that I decided to write the book is because as I saw what was written in the space, and I felt like it did what I call, this could be an unsavory term, it did what I call blockchain vomit. It just vomits up everything that blockchain can do all at once, which is super overwhelming, and people can't take it. And so you lose them. Yeah. And so what I wanted to do was, and I challenged myself, this is before I knew I was writing a book, I challenged myself to think, okay, what's a framework that I can provide that would cover a lot of the ways that this technology has the potential to have impact. Right. And so I mapped out 6 and then worked to understand with each of those factors or forces, why is this important right now? What's the setting that blockchain is coming into? Yep. And so that would be what are the cultural and the social and the business pulls for it, because that's really important to understand. And then what could blockchain do, and what would be the implications of that? And so that's how I set it up. And then I thought I was just going to write a series of articles. Right. And it was with great disappointment that I saw that this actually had to be longer form and had to be a book, because books are hard to write. And
like, what made you think you could write a book? Like, that just seems crazy to me.
I knew I could write a book. I mean, everybody can write a book.
I can't write a book.
Yeah, it's so what I can be pretty intense, and for me it sort of built to a book, and I came up with a framework first and I sequestered myself and challenged myself to really flesh it out. And then it's just a matter of optimizing your ability to write per hours a day.
Right.
So, I just kind of, it disappeared for a while.
Like, would you do it again? Like, would you write a book again? It seems like
I'd write this book again. I would like to write it. So I feel like it's like a childbirth where it's extremely painful and then you forget about it. And so it was really hard, especially in the editing process. You want to be done with it and you're re-editing the whole thing. But I having gone through that, I have now 3 or 4 different ideas for books. And I don't know if I'll ever do them,
right.
But I'd like to. And I've already forgotten the pain of childbirth. It hasn't been that long.
It's crazy moving so quickly from a not non-serious, like with the internet. A lot of people, you could dismiss it if you're a business executive because it was porn and early. And so you're like, oh yeah, we can't be involved in that kind of, which you had with cryptocurrency. It was so tied up in, it wasn't 5 years ago that if you said, I want to buy some Bitcoin, people would be like, be careful, man. The FBI is going to put you on a list and that's mostly used for drugs. And so a serious person could say, hey, I'm not going to get involved in that, a serious business executive. So, but you should have made the shift from, okay, it's not just porn on the internet. It's a distributed workforce. It's not just, buying drugs with cryptocurrency. It's my insurance business getting disrupted. It seems like a book like yours would help an executive get past whatever biases they might have.
That's what I wanted to do, is show that there's real stuff that's happening in the space. And there certainly is momentum. There is a lot of momentum, and it's coming from large brands as well as disruptors.
Right.
And so it was, it's kind of at the point where if you didn't have a website in 1994, that was probably okay. But if you didn't have a website by 1997 or 8, that was really starting to be a
little
problem.
weird.
It's like, what are you doing? What are you thinking? And now we're at that point, and it happened actually pretty quickly. People feel like it's taken a long time, but this arc has moved a lot faster than others.
Right.
And you need to be learning and understanding this pretty much no matter what your functional area, because it will impact you. And it will, I make an analogy. I was in Iceland last year, and we all know that 90% of an iceberg is underwater, right? We all know that. And of course, there's an analogy here where a lot of the development is happening underneath. It's very subterranean at first. Right. But what I didn't know about icebergs is you cannot actually go up and touch them in a boat. It's super dangerous because, of course, they're beautiful. I want to go touch them.
Yeah, why can't
I want to touch an
go?
iceberg. It's because they're always shifting and morphing under the water, and they can flip at any moment submerge the boat, and you won't know. There's no warning.
Right.
And so this feels the same way, where there's all this subterranean activity, and there's a lot of projects that are going on that are potentially very disruptive. They're multi-year projects, right. And people aren't talking about them. They're happening behind closed doors. And when we hear about them, it might be too late. So when the general public hears about them, it might be too late. And so that's why it's important to get ahead of this, because this shifts power and will shift there will be competitive advantage that is found for those that understand it early. Is there any like dark thing that you see? Like absolutely.
Chaos, countries collapsing, like what's the...
So 2 things. One is bad actors. So every technology, every tool can be a weapon. It just depends how you hold it. And so for every technology, it's really important that we understand as best we can the implications. The other thing is that we do not know what the real implications will be, and we won't know it for some time, even if you look at the internet. So when Tim Berners-Lee created the World Wide Web, he created it to be this permissionless and open place, and it was. But over 30 years, this dark underbelly has emerged where we live in a world where we can't tell what's real. Power's concentrated in just a few players, and increasingly so. And there's all sorts of problems that have emerged by this. So even Tim Berners-Lee himself has been increasingly concerned about these problems and has stepped down from the World Wide Web Consortium and his role at MIT to found a blockchain company to try to take the world to a new tipping point. But that was the internet. The same things are going to happen with this. So if we look at, say, Facebook's Libra, we do not understand what kind of implication that will have. And that's why regulators are trying to understand, ill-equipped to do so, but they're trying to understand it. This could have a third of the world's population are Facebook users.
Right.
And so that, with this technology, creates an incredible power to create massive change very quickly and to do it irrespective of borders. And so these are the kinds of things that we all need to wrestle with now because it can live outside of ownership. We need to understand what that means. And so often technologies have the capability to transcend their creators. And this is absolutely that case. And that's another reason why I wrote the book is this is so fundamental and so huge and so few people understand it. And that's hecka dangerous.
Yep.
We need more minds in the space, more thinkers, more diverse thinkers, more different kinds of expertise, ways of thinking to really try to project and understand what will happen with this because what we're baking into this operates in a way more like hardware than software. It's we're baking in governance and ways of operating that are hard to change. And so we need to understand those really well. And so people that are complaining that it's taking so long, we need it to move slowly enough so that we can do a better job of projecting where this will go and build it ethically.
So I noticed something in the book for blockchain. It's like filled with women. Like you mentioned Sheila Warren, but Eva Colley, Amber, I'm going to say everyone's name wrong. The blockchain person at Morgan Stanley, venture capitalists.
Who's now at Clover, yeah.
I mean, you don't expect a lot of women in a book about blockchain.
Yeah, it's interesting. I found incredible stories from men and women, and so there's a great book in the space, Digital Gold, that was written by Nathaniel Popper. It is a wonderful book, fantastic history, highly recommend it. But one thing that struck me is when I read that book, I was so confused because there's maybe 2 women mentioned.
Right.
And yet there were women in the room early on. And some of them I interviewed for my book. And so I think it's just about, they may not be the ones that are showing up at some of the conferences.
Yep.
Because they're off doing the work. But there are so many incredible women doing amazing things to bring the space forward. And I think that their work is important to showcase.
Yeah, it's been interesting, this podcast, the number of stories that people tell where they're like, oh yeah, there are all these women involved you've never heard of. I mean, Alpha Girls, you've heard of all of them because they're famous venture capitalists. But I was talking to somebody who's talking about the early internet, where to get a web address, you basically called some woman. Like it was some woman was like kind of running the whole internet out of some office in Washington, D.C. And then when you bring her up, people are like, oh yeah, we all know who she was, but she's sort of just not in the consciousness in the way some of the, the Winklevoss guys are and crypto and that kind of.
There was an interesting trend that I noticed is when I was interviewing for the book, I came across a lot of women doing really interesting work who shared with me that they preferred to be the person behind the computer, doing the coding, doing the work, quietly running the business, but found in this space that they felt an obligation to take more of a visible role because of the dynamics we've been talking about, where this is a very important technology that has a chance to change things for the better or maybe not. Right. But this is a very pivotal moment. And so you're finding that there are women that are stepping into the spotlight that may not have naturally fallen in that or had that tendency because they feel it's important, and they are writing and they are speaking and lending their voice simply because they feel it's important personally.
So what are you doing next, or what are you excited about in this space? Like, what is the next thing? Like, the book is out there. You're probably considered an expert now, even though I know you don't like
Please
that.
don't use that word.
You're a person that someone might want to have come talk about blockchain.
A lot. Yeah. Well, so there's a couple threads. So I love my consulting work. So I continue with my consulting work, and often it's a mashup of these technologies, and that feeds me and keeps me, I have this insatiable intellectual curiosity. So that keeps me engaged and interested. But I also feel this obligation. And so I make sure I partition some of my time to continue to educate. So I've been on the road a lot and speaking to executives, especially non-technical executives, about what kind of implication could this technology have, and why should they learn about it? And so I've been giving a lot of keynotes in the space and helping to explain it and helping to engage. And that's been really wonderful. It also helps me keep out of the echo chamber that we tend to have in a space. So the more time that we spend in a space, we believe that people know more than they do. And that's really dangerous. And because I have really double-clicked so hard on this space, right, I realized I would be in danger of that, where I lose a lot of my capabilities to explain this to the outside world. And so I actively, not only because it's interesting and because I feel an obligation, but because I think I need to train myself to keep current with what's happening out there, because in the space, we think that people should know so much more than they do.
Right. And what reaction are you getting as you talk to these executives? Are they like, I don't get this? Or like, oh, crap, I got to go back to my office and make some changes? Or like, what's the...
So I often ask at the beginning of a talk, and I just did a series of talks where it was a group of CMOs, and then it was a group of CFOs and a group of CIOs. And for all three of those functional areas, I always ask, okay, where do you fall on the spectrum? Are you down the rabbit hole? Are you kind of so-so on this? Or do you really know very little? And you would be shocked at how little people understand about this. This is mid-market, right? How little people understand. And so that was a big surprise. And then after it, if I do a good job with a talk, after, people are coming up to me saying, you've totally changed the way, I realize I need to retrain the way I think, because there's a lot of things in this that will shift and more conventional wisdom. For example, that we benefit most from collaboration over competition, right? So there's things like that totally floor people, and an excitement to learn. And so I know if I've done a good job when people are really engaged after. And that's what I want to do with this. And that's why when I do talks, I really try to make it accessible. And I talk about real life use cases that will change the way that we work, live, and play that are based on this technology.
So I need to ask you one final question.
Yeah.
Are you Satoshi? What were you doing in 2008?
Yeah, definitely not. Definitely not.
But isn't that what Satoshi would say?
So you could cross me off the list.
Oh, man.
I know.
Wouldn't that be great?
The search goes on.
If I had a podcast and I figured out who's Satoshi. So the story, for people who don't know, the white paper describing Bitcoin was written by somebody, and we don't know who it is. That's a crazy story, too. There's actually a guy, and people email him, and there's some entity called Satoshi.
It could be a team. It could be a woman.
It could be, we
don't know.
And this person interacts with the world for a while. When Bitcoin is like, there's 10 of them, and then there's 50 of them, and then this person disappears.
Yeah.
But has like $8 billion worth of Bitcoin just sitting there.
Has not been spent except for her testing a transaction on a pizza.
Right. And given the way blockchain works, the whole world can see this. The whole world
can see it.
This thing. And so you have to, so just in terms of like an intellectual exercise, like there's a person or entity or whatever, because it's a person who created this thing, disappeared, doesn't want any of the $6 billion, or like, just in terms of a story, it's just so cool.
And this also gives people a lot of hesitation because it sounds so scary. Who created this thing? We have to understand this was just something that was launched onto the world and now there's so many different derivations of it. But that's part of the interesting. There's so many interesting stories in the space.
Yeah.
That's probably the biggest.
If you want to read a good book, go back and read that. I think that's covered in that.
Digital Gold.
Yeah, it's such a great story.
And also, I encourage people to read the original white paper from Satoshi. So it's actually surprisingly easy to digest. Some of the math is not so easy to digest, but it's surprising for someone who's not a mathematician. But it's an easy read, and it's really important. And spend 5 minutes reading it, easily foundable on the internet.
So
Findable.
People should get your book, Unblocked. But how do people find you or follow you or keep up with you?
At Unblocked Future on Twitter.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, it's so great to talk with you this morning.
All right. My guest has been Alison McCauley. Her book is Unblocked. This is the Something About Your podcast. Talk to you next time.